Okay, I want you to close your eyes for just a second.
Right.
We are going on a little trip today. I want you to picture a garage in the suburbs.
Okay, I'm there.
The big aluminum door is rolled all the way up because finally, after a pretty brutal winter, the snow is turning into that gray, slushy mess on the driveway.
Oh, yeah, that very specific late winter slush.
Exactly. You can smell the wet pavement and maybe the sharp tang of exhaust fumes from a cold engine starting up somewhere down the street.
I can picture it.
And on the workbench next to you, there's a distinct choice. You are either cracking open a tab or a Budweiser.
Wow. That is quite the visceral image. It's a very specific, gritty kind of atmosphere, isn't it?
It really is. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today, we aren't looking at a scientific paper.
Nope.
And we aren't breaking down a biography of some tech CEO. We've gotten our hands on something a bit different. It's a pop culture report.
Right, which is essentially a newsletter-style time capsule.
Exactly. Written in real time and dated exactly to March 1981.
And what's fascinating about this document is it completely lacks the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah.
Usually when we talk about the 80s, we talk about it as this finished product.
Like the neon, the big hair.
The synths, the excess, all of it. But reading this report, March 1981 feels messy. It's confused.
It doesn't really know it's the 80s yet.
Exactly.
The source actually refers to the vibe as a hangover, which I think is just perfect.
It is, because the 1970s are technically over, but they definitely haven't left the building yet.
No, they haven't.
The source paints this picture of a culture that is standing on a bridge. Behind them is the gritty realism of the 70s.
Yeah.
The Vietnam fallout, Watergate economic stagflation, and
Well, they don't quite know yet, right?
Right. They're just seeing the first flashes of the real 80s starting to boot up.
So our mission today is to use this source to decode that specific limbo. We're going to look at what was playing on the movie screens, what was blasting out of car stereos,
And the teching.
Oh, yeah. The piece of technology mentioned in the text that, and I'm really not exaggerating here, basically rewired the human brain regarding how we interact with public spaces.
It really did. It completely changed the architecture of our daily lives.
But let's start at the movies. The source dedicates a huge chunk of text to the box office, and it paints a really conflicting picture.
Yeah, it's almost like a battle for the soul of the decade is happening right there on the marquee.
Totally. On one side, you've got a film called Thief.
Starring James K. Pollan, which is a heavy hitter.
Right. Now, looking back from today, we see Thief as a cult classic, right? A stylistic masterpiece.
Sure.
But the source treats it as something almost alien. It describes the experience of watching it as shocking.
Yeah.
Why was this movie such a jolt to the system for an audience in March of 81?
It's the aesthetic. The source zeroes in on the soundtrack immediately. It literally says it sounds like the future.
Wow.
And that's because it was scored by Tangerine Dream.
Okay, for listeners who might not be deep into electronic music history, who exactly are Tangerine Dream?
They were a German electronic group. And you have to understand, before this moment, movie scores were lush. They were orchestral.
Like John Williams.
Exactly. I think John Williams doing Star Wars, or maybe some funk guitars and saxophones, if it was a gritty cop movie.
Right.
Tangerine Dream brought in sequencers, synthesizers, this repetitive hypnotic electronic pulse.
The source actually uses the words electronic gritty and neon all in the same sentence to describe the vibe.
That is the birth of the Michael Mann aesthetic right there.
Oh.
Thief is visually dark, wet streets, neon lights reflecting on pavement, and that cold detached synthesizer sound.
It's so specific.
The source is reacting to that because it had never really been seen in mainstream American cinema before. It was the first true 80s looking and sounding movie.
It was cool.
It was cool, but it was also cold.
But here's the conflict. Right next door to Thief, the source mentions everyone is still talking about ordinary people.
Which is the polar opposite experience.
Completely. The source notes that ordinary people had just swept the Oscars the previous week. And the writer seems surprised, almost confused, honestly, that Robert Redford, the Golden Boy actor, directed something so depressing.
Well, Ordinary People is the absolute peak of the 1970s style.
Yeah.
It's a domestic drama about grief, suicide, family dysfunction.
It's heavy.
Very heavy. It's quiet. It's realistic. It's essentially a play put on film. So in March 1981, you have this cultural battle happening. The Academy Awards are crowning the 1970s style of emotional realism.
While down the hall, James Caan is running around to a synth soundtrack that sounds like a robot having a panic attack.
Exactly. You have the past winning awards and the future winning the cool factor.
Yeah.
But there's a third element in the source that I think is even more important for understanding the shift in Hollywood.
Yeah.
The writer mentions seeing a poster in the lobby.
Yes. This part cracked me up. The source says, I keep seeing these posters for that new Harrison Ford movie coming in the summer. It looks like it's going to be huge.
They're talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It hadn't even come out yet. It was still months away.
No, it hadn't. And this is a crucial insight into the industry at that exact moment. Ordinary people, the serious drama, was the past. Thief was the cool indie edge.
And Raiders.
Raiders represented the blockbuster era. The source perfectly captures that anticipation. This shift from movies being about reality to movies being about escape.
The writer literally says, I'm just waiting for the summer. It's that feeling of knowing the roller coaster is being built and you're just standing there waiting in line.
And that anticipation, that whole marketing hype cycle was brand new. That was the Jaws and Star Wars effect finally settling in.
Right.
By March of '81, audiences were being trained to wait for the big event. The movie wasn't just a story anymore. It was a cultural event you had to prepare for.
Okay, so we leave the theater heads buzzing with Tangerine Dream and we hop into the car.
Naturally.
The source mentions a Camaro, which feels incredibly appropriate. We turn on the radio, and if the movies were a battleground, the music charts in this report are absolute chaos.
It is a wild, wild mix. It's frantic.
The source is freaking out in a good way about the #1 song. It's Blondie's Rapture. And the writer asks a question that seems so innocent today. They ask, is this the first time a rap song hit the top of the charts?
That question really anchors us in history, doesn't it?
It really does.
We have to remember, hip-hop had been bubbling up in the Bronx and Harlem for years. The Trigger Hill Gang had Rapper's Delight in 1979, which was a hit, but it was largely seen by the mainstream, meaning white suburban America, as a novelty record.
Like a one-off thing.
Right, a one-off.
But Blondie is different.
Very different. Blondie is new wave royalty. Debbie Harry is the queen of CBGB's, the punk club scene. For her to incorporate rapping into a pop song, that was the bridge.
The crossover.
Yeah, the source calls it wild because for a suburban kid in 1981, this was likely their very first exposure to the flow of hip-hop, delivered by a face they already trusted.
It's interesting you mentioned that, trust, because the source treats it like a really fun experiment. Like, she's actually rapping as if it's a magic trick. It mentions the lyrics about the man from Mars and eating cars. It's totally surreal.
It really represents the cross-pollination of New York City at that time. You had the art school punks and the hip-hop pioneers hanging out at the same parties in the Lower East Side.
And Rapture is the sonic evidence of that.
Exactly. It's the moment the downtown scene went global. It paved the way for MTV, which launched later that year, to eventually embrace the genre.
But then you hit the scan button on the radio and you land on something completely different. The source says you can't go anywhere without hearing REO Speedwagon.
Ah, yes. Keep on loving you.
The source basically admits that you are legally required to sing along when the chorus hits. It says, I don't care who you are, you're singing it.
It's mandatory. This is the other side of the 80s coin. If Blondie is the experimental edge, REO Speedwagon is the birth of corporate rock.
Corporate rock? That sounds a bit harsh.
Well, it's descriptive. Look at the production. It's polished, it's loud, it's designed specifically to sound good on FM radio in a massive stadium.
Yeah.
It's the power ballad. This wasn't the raw protest music of the 60s or the grit of the 70s. This was music designed to move units and fill arenas. It creates a very specific feeling of bigness.
So we have the experimental rap pop crossover, the polished power ballad, but then the source takes a sudden dip. There's a mention of John Lennon's Woman sitting high on the charts.
Yeah. This is the emotional anchor of the document. It stops the fun for a moment.
The writer says, it's bittersweet, man. We still miss him.
We can't gloss over this. John Lennon was murdered in December 1980. So in March 1981, it's only been 3 months.
Wow, just 3 months.
The wound is incredibly fresh.
It feels like the source is saying that the party is the synths, the rap, the blockbusters, but everyone is still wearing a black armband.
Precisely. Len represented the idealism of the 60s and 70s. His death was effectively the psychological end of that entire era.
Right.
Seeing his songs on the chart was a constant reminder that the dream was over. It adds this really heavy layer of grief to what is otherwise a pretty optimistic time capsule. It reminds us that 1981 wasn't just fun, it was a time of heavy transition and loss.
It's a lot to process during a simple car ride. So let's get home. We're back in the living room. The TV is on. What is capturing the American attention span in March 1981?
But if you trust the source, the biggest thing happening is the NCAA tournament. March Madness.
The source is obsessed with the Indiana Hoosiers. It talks about them like they are a military unit.
Legendary team, led by Isaiah Thomas, who's just a kid then.
Yeah.
And coached by Bob Knight.
The source mentions Knight is intense as ever on the sidelines, which, knowing what we know now about Bob Knight and his chair-throwing incidents intense, feels like a very polite understatement.
It does, but it captures the energy of the moment. This is the point where college basketball was really exploding into a televised spectacle. You had these personalities, Knight as the drill sergeant, Isaiah as the prodigy, that were becoming real household names. It wasn't just regional anymore. It was national entertainment.
But if you weren't into sports, the source says you were still talking about Dallas.
Soap opera.
Specifically, the Who Shot JR's storyline. Now, the source admits the actual reveal happened months ago in November 1980, but it says the fallout is still the biggest thing on TV.
That speaks perfectly to the monoculture of the time. We don't really have this anymore.
No, definitely not.
Today, if a show has a big twist, we tweet about it for 24 hours and move on.
Yeah.
We binge the season in a weekend and forget it by Monday.
Right, spoilers are everywhere instantly. If you miss it by an hour, you're done.
But back then, there were only 3 major networks. When Dallas had a cliffhanger, 80 or 90 million people watched it.
That's insane.
It was a shared national experience. The fallout lasted for months because everyone was watching the exact same aftermath. It was the water cooler conversation for half a year. The source confirms that this story had a remarkably long tail.
It's amazing to think about a TV plot point having that much staying power. But speaking of TV, the source mentions a teaser for a new show that they think looks gold. The Greatest American Hero.
Oh, classic.
The premise described in the source is guy gets a superhero suit, loses the instruction manual. The writer thinks this is the funniest concept they've ever heard.
This signals a massive shift in tone. In the 70s, sci-fi and superheroes were either super campy, like Batman 66, or oddly serious, like The $6 Million Man.
Right.
The Greatest American Hero introduced this screwball comedy element. It's a vulnerable hero. He's clumsy. He crashes into walls.
Felt like the country was ready to laugh at authority a little bit.
Maybe. Or maybe it was just a move toward lighter, more escapist entertainment.
Yeah.
We didn't want the brooding hero anymore.
Yeah.
We wanted the guy who was trying his best but failing just like us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It fits that morning in America optimism that was really starting to bubble up.
Okay, I want to pivot to the section of the source that I found the most mind-blowing, the cutting edge section. This is where we look at the tech. And honestly, this is where the time capsule aspect hits the absolute hardest.
This is where expectations and reality really collide.
The source is incredibly hyped about NASA. Specifically, the Space Shuttle Columbia. It notes it is launching next month, which would be April 1981.
This is a massive, massive deal.
The writer calls it a reusable spaceship and compares it to Star Wars. They say, that's like some sci-fi stuff right there.
We have to contextualize this. The Apollo moon missions were done. NASA had been somewhat quiet for a while. The space shuttle was pitched as the space truck.
Space truck.
Yeah, it was going to make space travel routine, cheap, and accessible.
Routine, that's the key word, isn't it?
Exactly. It represented a peak era of technological optimism. There was this feeling that the U.S. was back on top, technologically speaking. We were building a ship that could go up land like an airplane on a runway and then just go back up again.
Just incredible.
It felt like the future had finally arrived. The source captures that genuine wonder before the tragedies that came later.
But while the shuttle was the macro tech, there is a piece of microtech in this source that completely dominates the conversation. The writer shares an anecdote about walking down the street and seeing a guy wearing that Sony gadget.
The Walkman.
And the writer actually has to clarify for the reader. They say, not the big clunky tape recorder, but the actual small one for music.
That clarification is hilarious, but so necessary. Before 1980 or 81, portable music meant of a transistor radio where you couldn't pick the songs.
Yeah.
Or a boombox, which everyone else had to hear. The idea of high-fidelity stereo sound in a small box was basically witchcraft.
The source mentions the price, and I literally gasped. $200.
In 1981 money.
Right. I ran the inflation calculator on that. That is almost $700 in today's money for a cassette player.
A cassette player that didn't even record, it just played.
And the source acknowledges this. The writer says, it's crazy expensive. But then, and this is the real insight here, they say, but man, being able to carry your music in your pocket, the future is officially here.
That is the profound shift. It wasn't about the hardware. It was about the software of life. The Walkman introduced the concept of the private, sound bubble.
The bubble. Break that down for me.
Think about it. For all of human history, music was a shared experience. You sat in a concert hall, you listened to the jukebox in a diner, you listened to the family radio in the living room.
Always with other people.
Always. The Walkman allowed you to disconnect from the world around you. You could completely rescore your reality.
So walking down that gray, slushy street in March wasn't depressing if you were blasting Rapture in your ear.
Exactly. You were in a movie. You were the main character. It gave people control over their sensory environment for the very first time.
Wow.
The source writer complains about the $200 price tag, but they immediately admit they want one because the value proposition was freedom. Freedom from the environment. That is worth $700.
It's the ancestor of the smartphone. It's the ancestor of us all ignoring each other on the subway.
It really is. It's the moment we started to curate our own realities. It's when we stopped being just citizens in a city and became individuals in our own worlds.
It's funny looking back at the Walkman. Now we laugh at the cassette tapes and the AA batteries. But in that moment, it was the absolute peak of cool.
It was the iPhone of its day. It was the ultimate status symbol. If you had those orange foam headphones on, you were living in 1985 while everyone else was stuck in 1981.
So when we pull back and look at this entire document, the specific snapshot of March 1981, what is the narrative here? What does this pop culture report actually tell us about the human condition at that time?
I think we're seeing a society in rapid, messy transition. You have the technological optimism of the Space Shuttle and the Walkman, promising a sleeker, faster, more individualistic future. You have the cultural shift from the gritty realism of the 70s, represented by ordinary people in the grief over Lenin, to the neon electronic aesthetic of Thief and the blockbusters to come.
And it's all happening against a backdrop of melting snow and dirty garage floors. It feels incredibly grounded.
It does. It reminds us that history isn't just dates in a book. It's people buying expensive gadgets they can barely afford, waiting in line for movies missing their heroes, and just trying to figure out what the next decade is going to look like.
It was a moment of becoming. The 80s weren't fully there yet, but you could hear them coming down the street.
Usually wearing headphones.
Exactly. So before we wrap up, we always like to leave you with a thought to chew on, something to take this history and apply it to right now.
We talked about that $200 Walkman. To the writer, it seemed like a crazy amount of money, a ripoff even. Yet they admitted it was revolutionary because it offered privacy and personalization. It really makes you wonder about today.
So the question is,
what is the piece of technology today that we all complain about? The thing we say, oh, it costs too much, it's clunky, it's a ripoff. But in 40 years, people will look back and say, that was the moment everything changed. What is our $200 Walkman?
Is it those mixed reality headsets? Is it the electric car? Or maybe something invisible like AI subscriptions?
It's usually the thing that gives us a new kind of freedom at a price that hurts just enough to make us complain.
Only time will tell. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.